All right, let's dig into these gearboxes. Start by removing the blades. You always want to look for moisture down here to see if any of these are, the seal or the bearing is bad in here. Got a little bit of play. This one's on its way out. We'll take a closer look when we get it apart. See how this one is nice and dry. Got very little play, if any, and this one kind of looks like it has a little moisture around it. So this might be leaking slowly. Got a little bit more play, but not too bad. Probably still have some time left in this, but depending on how bad it is when we get into it, I might replace that bearing as well. So to pull the gearboxes off as an assembly, all you got to do is, there's these 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're 9/16, and then you got to hold the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and take that apart now, and we'll take the whole unit off as an assembly. It's a tip, anytime you drop a bolt, always keep your eyes on it when it falls, because it usually goes somewhere that you can't find it. Okay. And as you can see, the whole assembly. As you can see, the whole assembly is loose. Let's take the whole thing off as one unit. Don't be afraid to do this. These are very simple gearboxes. These are just 5/16 bolts. Give it a little tap to break the thing loose. And as you can see, the gasket's going to be fine to reuse. You can always put a little bit of silicone on there if you want. And looks like we're still full of oil, which is a good sign. So this oil is shared throughout the whole unit, even though they're separate gearboxes. The oil travels through each of the bearings and into the tube and shares the level. So if you put and fill up this one box and there's nothing in these, it'll slowly go down as it shares and equalizes over the rest of the gearboxes. So when you're filling back up, if you don't have all of these covers off, you need to keep filling up just the one over and over again until it stops going down. And to fill these, you're supposed to bring them right just a little bit above the top of the shaft that runs through here. That's the height that you want. So for now, let me go ahead and drain out what I can of the oil before I make a huge mess. That's good for now. So I can sit there all day because all the oil from the other ones are going to keep working its way down. Go ahead and get this side up. what, it seems I'm gonna spill it. Now we got a good part of the oil out. The importance of that is now we can put this one at a little bit of a lean. Actually, it'll stay right there. Where the remaining oil isn't going to spill out of there, and it's not going to come out of here when we open this up. Alright, I got the majority of the oil out. What I like to do is just set out a couple of rags, because no matter what, you're going to make a mess. Got some old crappy rags, so I don't mind. What I want to do is a visual inspection of the gears, which I'm doing now, looking in there. Make sure there's not excess play, which this one does have. You can see the gear in the back. You can see it moving up and down because of that bearing, and that's the problem bearing right now. Go ahead and look at all of them. Make sure there's no gear chunks or anything. Now again, I'm pretty sure these are original boxes. I've never replaced them. And you can tell the condition many hours. Just keep changing the fluid and don't let it run out. And it will, it'll last. So I have changed the bearings many times and the seals. I shouldn't say many times, probably a half a dozen times. But still the original boxes. No need to spend, you know, 180 bucks a piece or whatever they are. So what I'm going to do now is pull these two gearbox tubes off to isolate this center box, and we're going to go ahead and take that apart. And now inside here, there's the center shaft, and there's a collar that engages into, which looks just like this. And this is in between all the shafts, kind of a connector. They're all the same pretty much throughout the whole one, except the center shaft is shorter on one side than the other. But these are all the same. And this gasket here, I've already replaced in the past. I think it's a never-ending. I'm actually going to put this down in the bucket to drain. I think these gaskets are a never-ending replacement, because every time I take these apart, the gaskets rip. Oh, get some more oil. Let me try to dump that out. It seems no matter how long I leave these to drain, fluid finds its way out somewhere. So I don't bother sitting and waiting. I just deal with the mess and clean it up. Let's see if we can get you over here. Again, same deal. The center shaft and this little connecting collar. Put this down to drain. All right. Got that drained pretty good. Like I said, no matter what you do, you get oil everywhere. Okay, now you notice this is the center box that we're after, and here's the bearing. You noticed how I disconnected the gearbox and left the tube on the center box right here. The reason I did that is it's going to be easier to determine which one's the left and which one's the right when I put it back together. So I kept the short shaft on the gearbox on one, and then the other one that doesn't have the shaft obviously will be the long shaft. That way you don't get confused and rip it all apart and wonder which is which. Sometimes if you twist it a little bit, it increases the chances of not breaking the gasket. And that didn't work. Still broke, but it's going to be fine. Just put a little bit of RTV on there. Put that shaft aside. All right. Just get a little more of that oil out. All right, to take this apart, basically, this just slides right out. Now what you want to do before you take this apart, take note on what side the gear is on. Because if you put this shaft in, flipped around the other way with the gear on this side, your blades are going to spin backwards. And it can go either way. So you can see this bearing just slides right out. This bearing is just kind of sitting right in there. So I'm going to pull that shaft right out. See the gear. It's going to go back on the shaft. So again, it goes in like this. You could reverse it and have it like this, and the blades would spin the wrong way. Okay, so this bearing will just slide right out, but I'm just going to leave it in there. Well, don't want it to fall. Feels nice and smooth. Usually those don't go. Very rarely those go. This is the most common. This bearing and seal, and the two at the bottom of the left and right gearboxes where the blades are. That's where all the stress is. Okay. So as I clean this up, you can look and see that there's a snap ring inside there. Once we pull that snap ring, we're able to pull this gear off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, there's one bearing. This actually seems like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm assuming it's the other bearing that's the issue. I would typically take that keyway out if we were trying to get this seal out and save it, because you can even do what I just did to get the seal out and then take the screw back out and put a little bit of silicone and close that hole back up and reuse the seal. But because this bearing is shot, or at least the housing is, it looks like, not the bearing, it's already worn this beyond the point where I'm going to reuse it. So I'm going to get a new seal. Now we can see, if you look, the whole bearing is moving inside the housing. See it right on the edge, the outer. This is the inner, and this is the outer. This is all one piece of the bearing. And watch it move. You can see the oil squirting up in between. So again, the outer housing where this bearing sits in has worn larger. So technically, you know, to do this right, if you want to call it right, you would want to at least replace this housing. At that point, you'd probably just replace the whole T-box. But that's not what I'm going to do. You know, this bearing actually still looks fine. Doesn't have any play in it. It's just where it sits. And I did replace this last year, that bearing, as well as the seal, even though I'm going to get another seal now. So what I'm going to do is take this bearing out, and I'll show you inside the housing where it's worn, and we'll show you how I'm going to fix that. So to remove this bearing, you can see there's another clip in there that we're going to pull out, and then the bearing will slide out. The whole shaft will come with it probably. Aha. Okay, so now that that is out, this bearing's just going to slide right out. Give it a little help. Okay, we'll give it a lot of help. Now you can see a really good indication of what's going on here. The whole bearing is loose. So what I'm going to do Pull this bearing back out. All right, so this is the problem we're facing. Problem we're facing is we've got excess clearance between the bearing and the housing, as you can see there. So I'll show you what I'm going to do. Old set of feeler gauges, bunch of different thicknesses of metal. What I'm looking for is the really thin ones right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to measure the actual clearance that we have here. Okay, so that fits in there. Let's try this one. That fits in there. Work our way up. That's about it right there. So we've got 7/1000ths of an inch. Okay, so what I'm going to do is cut that in half because it's 7/1000ths from one end, complete gap with it up touching the other side of the wall. So if we put this bearing in the middle, we'd have about 3/1000ths or 4/1000ths around the whole circumference of the bearing. So of course, might not have one that goes that small, but we're going to make it work. 8,000, 7, 6, 5, 3. No 4. Okay, I guess we got 3. Okay, so watch this. 3/1000. You know what? Let's make it a little tight. Let's go with let's try the 5/1000. I'm going to pull this out. Now this isn't big enough to reach all the way around it. So I'm going to take my cutoff wheel and I'm going to slice this right down the center. So I've got 2 pieces, the right thickness, and I'm going to use these as shims to put on both sides of the bearing to hold it in the center. Now we have 2 thin shims. A little bit longer. Just going to go ahead and trim that. See, I got the little metal shims in either side. Now I'm going to carefully try to maneuver the bearing back in there, see how it goes. All right, well, let's see if those stay in there. I don't see anything poking out. Oh, the shaft's got some movement. Oh, I don't have the other bearing in yet. That'll change. But the bearing itself now, nice and tight. No play. That's some serious strong metal that I put in there because it was a feeler gauge. This is like spring steel, whatever it is. But certainly at least as good as the aluminum, taking up space. And there we go. Let me try putting this back together and see what we get. Now, as we're putting this back together, you want to make sure you clean every single piece really well. So when you put your new fluid in, it doesn't become contaminated immediately. All right, I cleaned the bearing up, put a little bit of gear lube in it. Now let's see if this side has the same problem with the play. And it does. As you can see, that extra gap. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Let's go back to the other one. Was I think we had 7/1000ths of a gap. And that does fit in there tight. And I already used the 5, was it? I'm going to try, let's go with the 3. That should take up enough. Okay, same deal. Gonna mix up a little bit of JB Weld. Just a little bit on this one, because there's really nothing stopping these from sliding out of the bearing as the machine's running. There is a gear that holds the bearing in, but I don't want this sliding out and rubbing up against the gear and kind of wearing itself out down to nothing. So I went and used some acetone and clean these and the surface inside there really good. And now I'm just gonna literally just put the lightest amount just to hold it in the aluminum housing. All right, I got everything wiped down pretty good, ready to reinstall. I like to lay out all the pieces. Quick update of what I forgot to mention and forgot to look for or to adjust while we had the gearboxes apart. So yes, I took the gearboxes back off because I had to. And you know, it's funny because it's the first time I've done this, because I've seen other people and I've heard of other people doing this, but I think because I was making the video, I just wasn't really thinking about it. Make sure that when you put these boxes back together, where the blade connects here, you have these flat spots. You want to make sure that this one, well, either one is 90 degree out from the other one. Okay, so right now I've got, let me put this one horizontal, perfectly horizontal, okay, like that, which the top one now should be vertical, the side should be vertical, and as you can see, they're not. So I have them out of time. So all I really need to do is just pull this one box off and then turn it to where it needs to be and connect the spline back up and it'll be fine, no big deal. But I wanted to show you the way I was doing it because I've already refilled this with all fluid and I didn't want to, you know, have to make a big mess and all that. So what I did is I put the gearbox up on end like this, which will have, you know, the oil or the majority of the oil that's in this box that I'm taking off drained down and, you know, into these air, you know, there's plenty of airspace down there for this small amount of oil to go. So that way when I disconnect this, there'll be very minimal leakage, if any. And I can take it off, you know, just these 4 bolts right here and, you know, spin it to where it needs to go and stick it back on, tighten it back up and throw it back on. But I just want to make an update video on that. In this format, so as you're putting it together, you don't get mixed up. The way to remember it is if you are sitting on the mower, which the drive shaft is facing at you, the left-hand side is the long one, the right-hand side is the short one. So just remember L for long, left long, and that way you won't make a mistake. And like I said, this one's still connected from before, and this also has a mark for an R on it at some point in the past. I don't know if I did that or somebody else did. I'm assuming there's an L right here as well. So just remember long left, and the short is on the right. And like I said, by doing it this way I know that this is the box that was on the right-hand side because it's bolted to the short shaft. I disconnected it on this side. So as you're mixing parts up and whatnot, you don't get them mixed up. These shafts can go either direction. I usually just keep them in the same direction. One thing I don't want to point out, but I want to ask Randy Countryside, my buddy here. As I was going through this, I kept you in mind with the problem you were having with the noisy. I'm wondering if by chance these collars, I wonder if maybe you didn't have these clips in. Not that, you know, you're stupid or anything like that. You know, I'm not messing with you as far as that goes, but maybe one had fallen out. Maybe you hadn't thought about it. Maybe neither one of them were there. I don't know. And maybe that created some type of, you know, extra noise in here. Because, you know, we talked about it in the past. I'm not sure exactly what possibly could have been going on giving you that noise. But, you know, these two collars go right up against those clips. So there's really nothing to go wrong there. Same thing with this one. Got the clip here and the clip here, which is stopping these collars from going any farther. So just wondering if maybe that was what your problem was. I don't know if you ever posted a follow-up on that or not. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and start putting this together. All the gaskets that I had, I decided I didn't have another seal. All I did is covered up that hole, like I mentioned earlier, that you could do with just some RTV. I used JB Weld. This seal actually doesn't seem that bad. I put it on the shaft, and it still has a good amount of tension on there, and it's nice and tight. So I'm going to go ahead and continue using this. If it starts leaking in the future, I'll take it off and change it. Luckily, you can change the seal without taking anything apart with it right on the deck. So I am going to reuse this as the assembly, and I am reusing all the gaskets. I have changed all these gaskets before. I'm not saying you should always reuse them or you should always change them, but I'm going to go ahead with keeping them this time. A couple of them did rip a little bit, so I used a little bit of sealant, you know, where it ripped, and kind of like put it back together. It's still a little tacky right now, so as I put it back together, it should seal up just fine. And if it does leak, it's going to be a very minimal amount. So let's go ahead and get started here. What I'd like to do, go ahead and just put this in the shaft housing, and this little dot always faces up. So I'm just going to kind of assemble everything, make sure all the splines line up. Okay, so this is how it would sit on the deck. And now, actually, yeah, we can do it this way. I'll go ahead and put this, because this would go down through the deck this way. Okay, so let me go ahead and just start a screw. Couple started. You don't want to tighten any of these down yet. You can put them in more than I am, but I'm just going to go ahead and once I get it over to the other side, you'll be able to see a lot better, but this is pretty much common sense. Make sure you hand start these, because one of the big problems that people face with these is the aluminum threads strip out. Then people end up putting a nut on the inside of the housing, which you can do on the left-hand side, but you can't do it on the right. Oh, actually, no, you can do it on that side. It's the center box that where the gear is on one side, which I believe it's the left side. Oh, the right side on this one, right there. You can't fit a nut if you put a through bolt on that one side, but you could do it on this side. So these would be the only ones you don't want to strip out because you can't really repair them without oversizing the holes. So just try to get these started by hand. Make sure the threads get in there nice. Everybody uses hand power tools nowadays, including myself. But sometimes you just gotta take a little time and make sure. So I'm gonna go ahead and just snug these down very lightly. Yeah, I did get that. All right. So that's that side. Now repeat on this side. Just put the shaft in here. Now this one I can engage into this box. Another thing you can do is you can actually stand it up on end. Make sure you got a lock washer on each one of these bolts. Now this is the side that you want to be extra careful not to strip out. Now I've had these apart, like I said, probably a half a dozen times. Never stripped any out. Never had anything come loose. Let's take that little extra time to make sure everything's good. Now, one thing that I never see anybody mention is, now that I tighten these up, I'm going to loosen these. Sorry about that. I'm going to loosen these up a little. And we have this side. Drop the wrench. So make sure that they're a little loose. I'll show you why. With these loose, there is actually play that you can twist these. Watch the relation between this one and this one. See that? It's actually turning here, but the point is, you can have this flat surface that bolts to the deck and this flat surface of the that bolts to the deck. If you have it all the way like that, and you go ahead and tighten these down, and then when you go ahead and bolt it onto the deck, it's going to twist this back and can possibly damage your gaskets or put things out of line. So what I like to do is just make it so it's kind of snug a little bit. I'll have kind of one bolt, a little snug on each one so it'll remember. Okay, that one I didn't take apart, so that's not an issue. Okay, so it still has some give. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring it over to the deck and lay it on the deck and push it down and make sure it's sitting nice and flush on the deck. And make sure you get anything off this mounting surface. And then carefully bring it back, knowing that everything is aligned to the deck. So at that point, you can go ahead and tighten up. You can go ahead and tighten up all of these bolts snug. It's a good amount of debris under here. Now this isn't super important. We're not building engines here. That's why I kind of am working in a little bit of a dirty environment when I took everything apart. These don't spin that fast where it's that big of a deal. Like you're dealing with a turbocharger or something like that. But I like to get the majority of this buildup off here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the deck and bring it right back. Okay, taking it easy so I don't lose where it is. But she's nice and straight now. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand tighten all of these gradually. Because I know that we're lined up. All right. What I'm going to do is make sure that this hole, in case this ever came apart, is on the top, spun this way. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put some 75 140 gear lube inside inside the center box. I'm not going to fill it completely up where it's supposed to be yet, just kind of getting it started. If I didn't do that, I would have to keep adding to both sides once I close this up to be able to get it in there and then sit there and wait for it to travel through this way and this way to fill it up. It doesn't take that long, but just to speed up the process, I'm going to put probably half of what needs to go in here. Just about even with the bottom of the bearing so it doesn't leak out. Actually, we can go a little more than that, as it's not going to come out of here. Should be good. Yeah, sorry about that. My camera died, of course, as I was assembling this. I just looked at the video and saw where it died and where it stopped recording. I didn't realize it till just now. However, all I did is I was filling the center box when the video died, and then I put this cover back on. You want to just tighten these down snug. You don't want to over tighten them and then squish out the gasket too much. What I like to use is a small ratchet, so you can kind of get a good feel for how much torque you're putting onto those little screws, because you don't want those to break or to strip, and you don't want them to be too loose either and have them fall out. So I've done this a bunch of times and never really had an issue. I have seen in other machines that I've worked on, these being a little bit loose might be just something you want to take a look at every once in a while, especially if you see a leak somewhere. Sometimes these could come loose and leak that way. Basically, the end result, put that cover on, put it up like this on the blocks, and then I filled with the 75 140. This is what's left over, about 12 ounces, and I use this for the PTO, the 8 ounces in the PTO box in my earlier video, and I also used it for this complete setup here. So as I said, 1 quart of this will do everything you need for gear lube. You know, obviously besides the drive motors that I mentioned before, the gears on either side, not the hydros. Those are also gear lube, but not something you need to change often, if ever. So I filled this up. You want to fill up both sides and fill it up just above the shaft level that comes across here. It's about 1 inch from the top. And sit and wait, because it will drain down a little bit and fill up inside this tube on, you know, on both sides. I already put some in the middle, so if you don't put any in the middle, you got to fill up this side, or, you know, one side or both or whatever, and sit and wait. It'll go down, work its way in, and kind of just keep going into the center box until it's full and everything's all leveled off. So that's why I like to put some in there to start with, and that speeds things up. This whole thing didn't cost me anything. I didn't use any money. Before I had, you know, kind of a slow leak here, and this was had a ton of excess play, which I thought was the bearing. Had I ordered bearings, I would have probably, you know, I wasn't going to change the gaskets this time. Again, there was really no need to. I just did that last time. I would have got this seal new. I probably also would have ordered a new seal for the bottom here. But all 3 of these seals can be changed when it's on the mower, so no big deal that I reused the old seal. I don't know if it was on camera or not, but I took this keyway off to put the seal back on. I know that I left it on to pull the seal off, but it seems to be sealing fine. It might leak a little slowly. I actually kind of doubt that it will, because it was barely leaking as it was with all the extra play in those bearings. So let me see if I can set you down and get a good look here. This shaft now has 0 play just from putting those shims in. And she spins nice and freely. See both of the shafts working just fine. And this one's turning counterclockwise, while this one's turning clockwise, which they turn differently. So you always want to make sure that you got everything back together and turning in the correct directions. So this is ready to go back on the machine, and I'll be good to go. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be fine for the season for this. I don't think the seal is really going to give me an issue, honestly. And again, I fixed it for free. And hopefully, especially if you're in a bind and you need to get your mower back on the road really quickly, that some of these tricks helped you out. If you do need to order a bearing or a seal, they are available online. I've seen them on eBay, is usually where I go to. And then there's Pro Parts Direct, I believe, is a huge dealer for a lot of Walker parts. Preco Parts is another one. Just do a Google search. You'll find a bunch of places that do sell Walker parts. Just be careful, because some people do charge quite a bit more. What I like to do is find out what the part number is, either in the Walker book or, you know, by looking one up originally, and then I do the Google search for that part number and see, you know, if I can kind of find the best deal, or who has it in stock, or, you know, the quickest shipping, or, you know, whatever it is that you're looking for to source parts out. And might be a good idea, because the bearings, this shaft seal is different than this seal, or actually no, on this older model, this shaft and this shaft is the same diameter, so all 3 seals are the same. But the newer models, which I believe are about 2004 or so up, maybe even later, 2008 or up, the T-box in the center has a larger shaft, and that's the one with the pin that goes through it, not this keyway like the old one that I have here. And that has a larger diameter shaft, so the seal will be different than these 2 here. But the end boxes, I believe, are still the same size for the seal. So just be careful of that too if you end up ordering seals. So luckily for me, using this, I could order, you know, half a dozen of these seals and be good to go probably for 5 or 10 years. And that way, if any of these seals go, I can go ahead and replace them. These bearings do last a ton of time, especially if you use synthetic oil. And as long as they don't run out of oil, that's usually when the bearings go, is there was a leak, you knew there was a leak, and you ignored the leak, and that's when it runs dry and wipes out a bearing, which has happened to me once before through neglect of my own. Put this back on the mowing deck and get this job finished up. I'm not going to put the blades on because A, they need to be sharpened, and B, I want to go ahead and run this on the mower without the blades inside the garage blowing around, and A, get a good listen to the gearboxes and check for leaks. And there we go. Looking pretty good. No leaks. In time it might seep a little bit. Doesn't mean that there'll never be a leak, but we've now got nice tight shaft. Didn't cost us anything. So I'll keep an eye on it, and certainly ready to go with that setup now. So just need to put this cover back on and this cover here, and good to go. I'm not putting it on right now because I do want to wash this deck off really, really good with the pressure washer before I do that, and then finish up the greasing and the tire pressure. All right, thanks. I hope this helps somebody, and don't be afraid of tackling these gearboxes. They're pretty simple. A lot of the parts are pretty much the same inside. They're just a gear with a gear and a shaft with some bearings, so nothing crazy in there. Have a good one.